Dare I say the White Sox have some standards this season? Let's discuss on today's episode of Locked On White Sox.
You are Locked On White Sox, your daily Chicago White Sox podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I'm your host, Todd Welter, a lifelong Sox fan, a contributor for SouthsideShowdown.com, part of the Fansided Network. And also, I've covered Major League Baseball for outlets such as the Associated Press. Thanks for making Locked On White Sox your first listen every day, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure to hit the like button on today's episode. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And also follow or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Well, Grant Taylor dazzled in his big league debut, but I want to discuss his call-up from a different angle, in that he earned the right to be here, while Bryse Wilson deserved his DFA. So let's discuss how this is another sign of the Sox taking a step in the right direction by actually having some standards. Then Luis Robert Jr. had a great performance last night, and there's report that contenders are still interested, so let's look into those teams and see if they could yield something respectable in a return. And finally, it's Wednesday with Taylor up and being developed first out of the bullpen. Let's revisit Chris Sale, Garrett Crochet, and Michael Kopech's times as relievers, as Taylor's on a similar path on this week's Wayback Wednesday segment. And this episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. All right, so Grant Taylor was as good as advertised in his big league debut. Pitched a clean seventh, and as MLB.com White Sox beat reporter Scott Merkin pointed out on X, formerly Twitter, and actually a lot of people pointed it out, but Scott got it first. Here's what he writes at Scott Merkin. Taylor, 12 pitches, 10 strikes, according to StatCast, 6 pitches over 100 miles per hour. Yeah, he didn't have 10 strikeouts. That would be impossible when you're facing, only 3 batters, but still, only 2 balls, hitting, just basically firing pellets out there. Now, the debate can rage on about whether it's still better to develop him as a starter over a bullpen arm. But if his arm is only going to allow so many pitches, it's basically his arm is only going to allow so much work, then go with what his body is telling him and telling everyone else and make him a late inning weapon. And that honestly should end the debate. That should be it. Because there was talk, the velocity was dipping a little bit. Even after just having him work, I think 3 innings is what they were doing. It was once a week, 3 innings at AA. And they were starting to have maybe some physical issues. So they moved him to the bullpen, and lo and behold, his arm is starting to get better. He keeps getting stronger. So I say, why not go with the bullpen? Because that's what his body is telling everybody. And that's the other thing. Do you want to see Taylor as much as possible? I do, especially for the rest of the decade. Now you could say, well, then let's make him a starter so he can eat 5-6 innings, over 30 to 35 starts. But again, if his body's not going to allow him to make 30 to 35 starts, but maybe 30 to 40 appearances, let's leverage the appearances. And, Mason Miller, the Oakland A's did that with him. Now, granted, it was not more of a physical issue, but, he wasn't looking like to be a great starter, so they move him to the bullpen, and he's one of the best closers in baseball. I saw this debate rage on in Milwaukee with Josh Hader when they were starting to emerge from their rebuild. Should they make him a starter? Should they make him a closer? Well, he went on to be a very darn good closer, an all-star closer, so there's nothing wrong with that. And again, if there were signs in the minors that his arm might not be able to handle a starter's load, let's go with then maximizing what he can do to help this team win. And since it's already good enough to be in the majors, let's make sure he can stay in the majors and off the 15-day IL. But that's not the angle I want to go with, when it comes to his promotion. That's not kind of what I want to go with here. Because one reason is the organization still has not completely scrapped the idea of him being a starter down the road. Moving to the pen is just taking advantage of, getting him to the big leagues. He's ready to go. Having him fire those 100-mile-an-hour fastballs at Birmingham it's just a waste of time now. He showed it in spring training. He belongs in the big leagues. So it's not just a matter of him belonging. It's just he earned it. He earned the right to be on the Chicago White Sox right now. And I want to take that angle of the White Sox are actually having the simple standard of guys earning the right to be called up. It's an amazing standard. They're also putting in these standards of like helping guys that are struggling with, maybe some extra tutoring, like Colson Montgomery. And that's the other reason why I want to bring this up, because they were trending towards like, let's just give Colson, his shot. Let's make him the starting first baseman. He had a great September down at Charlotte last year, had a great Arizona Fall League. He's ready. And clearly he's not. And maybe if he can stop being, like I said, stop being a magnet for taking off pitches off his knee and his hand where that requires him to miss some games, he might be starting to earn his way back. But on the flip side, they've actually put in the standard of holding guys that are playing poorly accountable. And now I am going to have to put a buck in the mentioning 2024 season jar, but that was something that just wasn't on display last season. We didn't see a lot of accountability last year. So his call up and Bryse Wilson's DFA is another sign in the big picture that things are moving in the right direction. Because that's right, Wilson was offered up as a roster sacrifice to make room for Taylor. This was not, well, let's demote someone else with options to make room, because gosh darn it, we got to showcase this veteran. We got to showcase him, folks. Maybe the vitality of a bullpen arm, he'll get on the swing up and he'll get us something, viable. And the organization is finally acknowledging what we were all seeing, that Bryse Wilson was having a terrible season. Therefore, no trade value. Therefore, let's just move on and eat the remaining of his $1.5 million deal. It wasn't terrible to kick the tires on him, even though thinking he was a swing starter, I think, was bad logic, just what you looked by in his numbers for the Brewers last year. But long relief, it couldn't have hurt to brought in a veteran arm. See if he could pitch well and flip him at the deadline. But it wasn't. And I'm glad, because I didn't want to see his 6.95 ERA with a 6.43 FIP keep getting, trotted out there. I'm glad that they decided, let's not see if there's a bounce back. This was, hey, we got this young kid firing bullets with pinpoint accuracy in Double-A. And this veteran, whose only major contribution so far this season was he was actually willing to go out and eat innings while getting roughed up by the Tigers last Monday to preserve the bullpen. That was I would say, his best contribution. He was willing to wear one to save the bullpen. That's not actually a positive contribution. It's just hey, you're a good teammate, but you're still bad. And last year, you and I probably would have likely had to have endured Bryse Wilson probably for another month or two, much like the team just kept throwing out like John Brebbia or Justin Anderson. And how many times do we have to be tortured by those guys? And it wasn't like the club last season didn't have options that earned the right to be tried out of the pen from AAA or AA. It was just this stubborn refusal to be like, we got to showcase these guys. Oh, come on, they're going to give us something. I mean, Fraser Ellard probably should have been called up sooner. And they probably should have given Addison Coffey a run. But nope, got to try to showcase these guys. Although Steve Stone, he was on 670 The Score yesterday, and he alluded to also maybe this year's manager is actually doing something. He's willing to listen to his pitching experts. A novel concept. It's amazing what happens when you bring adults into the room to run the team. You got Will Venables being like, okay, Brian Bannister, if you think Grant Taylor is the best arm you've ever seen and it's better coming out of the bullpen, let's do it. And then Chris Getz also listening. Not this, let's get Grinder McGrindy guys. And there is accountability. Andrew Vaughn finally was held accountable for a terrible start to the season. Luis Robert Jr., who I'll discuss in the next segment, was at least finally dropped down in the batting order. Jacob Amaya's automatic out status was eventually DFA'd. Now, granted, sometimes it doesn't happen sooner than we like, but at least it's happening. And now Josh Rojas, obviously he's still getting at-bats, but at least the DFA or demotion option card is being played, and it's being played in a tighter time frame. Giving Wilson 2 months seemed fair. Giving Andrew Vaughn almost 6 or 7 weeks seemed fair, because the season's going nowhere. But the moment that you had guys behind them pushing the issue to get called up, the team has actually appropriately responded. And the accountability is still going on, for example, with Andrew Vaughn still at AAA Charlotte. Because remember, it was Tim Elko who they brought back first, because he actually earned the runway. Grant Taylor earned a runway. Kyle Teal has earned a runway. Notice the end result too? A bit more winning and a better watching experience. Yesterday's viewing experience was enjoyable because Luis Robert Jr. showed why he still has trade value, and if he can keep producing more 2-for-4 nights over the next 6 weeks, maybe the trade return will be better than, say, a 15th ranked prospect. And there's a report contenders are still interested, so let's dive into it after the break on Locked On White Sox. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. And that's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and you start building wealth. And instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. And managing your money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. And I know my wife was getting stressed out tracking all of our expenses, but no more. Since we started using Monarch Money, we've been using it to make sure we can watch where we can cut on spending on things we don't need and plan out saving for retirement. For us is actually coming sooner than we think. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONMLB at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONMLB for half off your first year. And welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, make sure to hit the like button on today's episode and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox if you've not done so already. And if you can't catch the show on YouTube, Locked On White Sox is available on all major podcast platforms, so make sure to follow or subscribe on places such as Apple or Spotify. Either way, get your 30-minute fix of Chicago White Sox baseball venting with me. All right, so Luis Robert Jr. hit his first home run in over a month. He also drove in the team's first run of the game, and he made an amazing diving catch in the 8th inning that killed a Houston rally. You know, the ability to wreak havoc on the base paths and still play solid to elite defense is why, he will have trade value at the deadline. And remember, he does need to be traded. He has to go. 1, for his own mental sake. 2, because you're not going to pay him $20 million next year because that's his team option if he continues to hit under 220 with an OPS under 600. That's just not $20 million worth of value. Billy Hamilton could play great defense and run the base as well, and he never earned $20 million a year. So the team has to get something for LRJ. And hey, Houston, maybe you might want to see about giving up some of that prospect capital for a guy who does hit 367 with a 1.061 OPS at Minute Maid. I'm just throwing it out there, just tossing it out there. Although in the offseason, everydayers, hopefully you recall, I did do a show on them probably not being the best trade partner given their current farm system status. However, other contenders are reportedly kicking the tires on the idea of trading LRJ. Latin baseball insider Francis Romero, he tweeted this out. This is at Francis Romeo FR. For those watching on YouTube, I got the tweet up. Luis Robert Jr. continues to draw attention as a potential trade piece. Teams like the Yankees, Mariners, Phillies are expected to be in the conversation ahead of the trade deadline, according to industry sources. Although I wonder if the industry sources are, Luis Robert Jr.'s agent, because given that Francis is very well connected within the Latin ball player community, maybe it's LRJ. This is some information. I would just say probably when it comes to where is the team actually hearing from, you probably do want to go with Bob Nightingale because how he is very well plugged into the team's front office, except for he, as James Fox and I kind of discussed on yesterday's show about how he is kind of out of touch when it comes to the team being potentially sold to Justin Ishbia in terms of controlling interest. He still at least has been, usually I think gets nuggets. This is just my hunch from somebody very well sourced within the White Sox organization. Now, Seattle has always been the dream for me to have him traded, one of the two teams. I would love to see LRJ traded to Cincinnati or Seattle, because especially Seattle, given that MLB Pipeline ranks their farm system 5th, Joel Reuter of Bleacher Report has them number 1. The Yankees might be the worst match, although I'll get to that in a second, but MLB Pipeline ranks their system 24th. Reuter has them dead last. Although in terms of value, actually, like when you put the scout grades, overall values, and then you assign a dollar value like Fangraphs likes to rank them, the Yankees actually are one spot ahead of Seattle per Fangraphs in terms of value, in terms of hey, a 50 grade value player is worth $1 million, that type of stuff. Then the Phillies, they're in the middle of the pack in terms of rankings. So in terms of what these teams could offer, let's just do an exercise here. This is not me reporting anything. This is not me hearing anything. This is just me going off the baseline and maybe a hypothetical just to give an idea of, maybe how could these teams match up. Let's just start with the baseline of Bob Nightingale's USA Today's report a couple weeks back of when he said the Mets and the Sox were talking about a trade revolving around pitcher Blade Tidwell, the team's number 15 prospect. Now, the Mariners' number 15 prospect is pitcher Braden Garcia. So the difference between him and Tidwell is Garcia's a lefty, he's 25, and he's at Double-A, and he's a reliever. So you're basically getting the Eloy Jimenez trade return, except for you actually have an officially ranked prospect, according to some of these, publications, where, like, say, Trey McGough was just a guy that had production for the Baltimore Orioles, but he was never really highly regarded in their system. Tidwell's slider, though, does grade out better, but both had the same overall scout grade of 45. So, okay, and for those that are saying, well, we need bats. Yes, I agree. But again, with all these rash of Tommy John surgeries that they had in the offseason, it can never have enough. You can never have enough pitching, number one. Number two, as we're seeing with this bullpen, you can never have enough promising young arms, especially on the cheap. The Yankees, though, could theoretically offer what the Sox need, and that's more position players. In Rafael Flores, he's their number 15 prospect, according to MLB Pipeline. He's a catcher, too, and you know how much GM Chris Getz loves him some catchers. And he's a slugger with 11 home runs already at Double-A, had 21 last year between High A and Double-A. Has a 287 average this year with an 842 OPS. He's 24. He will strike out a lot, though, but can also play first base, so he'll fit in quite nicely with the Sox because, the Sox do love their first baseman that can strike out too. Although Tim Elko drew 2 walks, and that's the thing. If he can be a little bit more patient at the plate, bump that on-base percentage up just a little bit more, and again, just diversify his hits, I think, again, give him the runway. Not sure if the Phillies obviously want to do business with the White Sox after that whole Garrett Crochet trade issues last deadline. Who knows if they trust him, and especially the demands. I think they wanted Andrew Painter, and it was like, whoa, slow down. Hey, we ain't doing that. But then again, the White Sox did get William Bergolla from the Phils for Tanner Banks, so it's not like they've never done business. And if they hypothetically offered up a package starting with their number 15 prospect, it would be 22-year-old third baseman Carson DiMartini. So another young top 30 prospect from the Phillies who has a 55 power grade profile with a good chance to be a good fielder too. Okay, I can be convinced. He just earned his promotion to Double-A. So on the flip side, not sure the Phillies move him because, I've always been saying, as every day as have heard me, I think once young hitters get to that Double-A and actually produce at Double-A, it's really hard for teams to actually give up because then they're viable hitters and they come cheap. The Yankees, though, have always been willing to move those guys where, it's kind of like, the Phillies seem to be more in that, okay, if he's at A ball, he's still an unknown, we'll move him, that type of stuff. And again, I'm not going to say that it's going to be a 1-for-1 and the Sox are only going to get the 15th best prospect on each team. Obviously, a good hitting run, if Luis Robert Jr. can have more 2-for-4 nights like he had last Friday and last night, I think that could bump up what they could get in return. Plus, again, I don't think it's a 1-for-1. I think it's more of maybe 2 prospects or maybe 1 top 30 prospect and maybe 2 scratch-off prospects, that type of stuff. And a bidding war between 3 teams, again, could prop up a better return. But when it comes to the scratch-off prospects, the Sox have gotten some promise from the Phillies. So that's the other reason why I'm like, okay, let's maybe kick the tires on the Philly system too. And also, when you just look at historical trends, the last time the Sox did business with the Mariners, he got Zach DeLoach. So you got to hope things then get better the second time around. But I would love to see if LRJ can go on a little bit of a hot streak to bump up the trade return with, say, the Mariners, because their top 10 is very impressive. And even if it's in, the 6 through 10 range, I would love to have a chance to get slugger Michael Arroyo. He's at A ball. He's a second baseman shortstop. He's 20. He's their 7th ranked prospect, or even outfielder Johnny Farmello. He's their 6th ranked prospect. Those would be more exciting guys. And I think they could help accelerate your timeline. It may take a little bit of time, but that would be definitely something that would be great to get. Well, it's Wednesday, so let's do a Wayback Wednesday segment. And in honor of Grant Taylor's promotion and coming in, he's getting his promotion is that he's going to be coming out of the bullpen. Let's discuss some other prominent pitching names that the Sox have had that they've started their big league careers out of the pen did. And that's Chris Sale, Garrett Crochet, and Michael Kopech. And that is after the break. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades supply house. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is a reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. And you need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for the trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trade Master program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. And I keep telling my brother-in-law, he's in the plumbing business, tell your company to use Supply House with all the advantages they provide to the skilled trades. Join the Trade Master program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. Welcome back to Locked On White Sox. I'm your host, Todd Welter. Again, shout out to all the everydayers. I appreciate your loyalty. Please hit the like button on today's episode. Recommend to your fellow Sox fans or baseball fans, friends, to subscribe to the YouTube channel at Locked On White Sox or wherever they get their podcasts, as the show's available on all major podcast platforms. So with Taylor going to the bullpen, you're going to hear a lot about how the Sox, developed Chris Sale and Garrett Crochet out of the bullpen. That's how their big league career started out. Even Michael Kopech was sent to the bullpen after injury stalled his career. Because remember, Kopech did debut as a starter in 2018, and then it seemed like forever for him to come back because he missed all of 2019 with Tommy John surgery, and then he opted out of the 2020 season. And again, that's why you could see this White Sox might want to be cautious with Grant Taylor. And things actually went well with all three of them to start at least their careers out of the bullpen, or again, in Kopech kind of getting a control out delete. And there is something to have a guy start, out of the bullpen. Again, Steve Stoney was on 670 to score yesterday, kind of citing, this is what the Baltimore Orioles did, when they started to have their contention run. Now, obviously right now their pitching is terrible, but a lot of that is because a lot of their promising pitchers are injured. But Kyle Bradish, those guys started out of the bullpen. It can never hurt to get, guys to start out of the bullpen too, because it gets you in that more of, I'm in an attack mode. I can't just ease my way into the game. I got to go out. I got to throw strikes. I got to get these guys out right away. So at least, things went great for Chris Sale and Garrett Crochet as they went on to become aces. Kopech, though, never quite got there as a starter. But let's just go over it on today's Wayback Wednesday. So Sale's first two seasons in the bigs were 2010 and 2011. And they came out of the bullpen. I do even remember Dom Cooper. He was trying to make sure that Sale could be a full-time closer. And I think he was just looking more, again, to preserve his arms. Everyone thought that wacky delivery would eventually shred his arm. Because remember, you could almost see his elbow, popping out like the bone when he would throw from that angle. It just always looked uncomfortable. Ooh, just getting the heebie-jeebies on that. Although it turns out he didn't need Tommy John surgery until he was in Boston. And it's a good thing that the White Sox didn't listen to Dom because, one of the few times they decided, yeah, we're not going to listen to you there, Coop. Because Sale had a 1.93 ERA with a 2.7.4 FIP in 2010 over 23 1/3 innings, and then a 2.79 ERA with a 3.12 FIP over 71 innings. But then he goes on to become a all-star dominant pitcher in 2012, and probably one of the best pitchers that we've seen this century on the White Sox. Obviously, it's still early in the century. Crochet, he dazzled in 2020 after being drafted. I mean, they basically drafted him, put him in the bullpen. And he had 6 games of dominance. I remember being like, whoo, whoo, whoo. And also, you got to wonder where the White Sox would be had Crochet not got injured in Game 3 of that wild card series against the then Oakland A's. Because that just put everything into chaos. And that was clear, hey, we gotta fire Ricky Renteria. He can't handle when things get that out of whack. But say Crochet stays healthy and he's able to pitch an inning or two. Do the White Sox lose Game 3? And if they win Game 3, how far do they go in the playoffs? Is Ricky Renteria brought back? Do we never have to deal with the, dark cloud of Tony La Russa? Who knows? But in 2021, Crochet obviously stays in the bullpen, has a 2.82 ERA over 51 1/3 innings with a 2.80 FIP and 65 Ks. Now, Kopech in 2021, he was also overwhelming in the pen. Did make 4 spot starts, though. In 40 relief outings, he had a 3.90 ERA, but he had 80 strikeouts. And again, the White Sox were able to have this just straight up velocity, end of the game, bullpen like rotation with Crochet and Kopech and Liam Hendricks. And technically, you're supposed to have Craig Kimbrell, but Tony La Russa didn't get the memo that, Craig should be actually a 1-inning, 9th-inning closer, where Hendricks should be your multi-inning guy, Kopech and Crochet your 6th and 7th guy. And, that should have been ideally what they should have done, and they didn't. Now, the hope is if the Sox eventually try out Taylor as a starter, he's more of obviously the Sale and Crochet, only of the right-handed variety. You want him to avoid being a Michael Kopech type head case. But if Taylor can be like those three with the ability to fire bullets for the next 2 seasons, out of the bullpen, I'll take it for right now. I think this is a good way to ease him in. As I said in the first segment, if his body is already saying, you know what, he might not be able to hold up over 160 innings, then let's take it down to 60 to 80 innings and really leverage him in what he can do very well. And that's basically blow smoke past these hitters. And again, there's data that Taylor could be like Mason Miller, or even, Stoney even mentioned on his hit with the score yesterday that, Liam Hendricks was a failed starter, went to the bullpen, his fastball ticked up a little bit more and he became one of the best closers in the game. So there's still nothing wrong with having an elite closer, because you do need a game over pitcher, to be yielded out of this rebuild. And we've seen what happens when the White Sox don't have a game over pitcher. Again, I've already put my dollar in the mentioning the 2024, season bucket. Michael Kopech was just blowing games left and right. And then after, he settled down and started following his pitch plan, they traded him away. And then they've had nobody to steal games. So that's the thing. I think they did a good job of starting him out in the 7th, but I would like to see them give him a shot at some point as being the closer. Well, that wraps up this edition of Locked On White Sox. Thank you for making Locked On White Sox your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night. Every game, every night, all season long. Get local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast. And I'll be back tomorrow with a chat with Sports Illustrated's Jack Ankeny on how the Sox have looked after crossing the milestone of having less than 100 games left, and why Chris Getz can't look too far ahead, even with the eventual ownership shakeup coming up. Granted, it's 5 years. But feel free to leave comments about today's discussion regarding the White Sox having some standards now. Luis Robert Jr. still having contenders interested in them in a trade, and this week's Wayback Wednesday. You can leave them at the episode page on YouTube, X, formerly Twitter, at Todd J. Dub, or at Locked On Sox, or you can email me at lockedonwhitesox@gmail.com. Have a great day, and I'll see you tomorrow.